everyone, and welcome along to another episode on the LOPSided Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Edward Bird from Solomonic. How are you doing?
Very good, thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Good. Look, great to have you on. And we're going to speak today about the dark arts of data and kind of talk through what it is Solomonic does and the benefits of Solomonic in that kind of disputes analytics space. But before we get into that, I'm keen to delve into you a little bit. So, who's your hero?
That's a good question. Can I have two?
You can.
So I mean, my sort of easy one is Nelson Mandela. South African originally, grew up in the apartheid era, and he was an extraordinary man in so many ways. Particularly, he had this willpower. He dragged us into democracy at some times through sheer force of will, which was extraordinary. And my other hero is my granddad. My granddad was a geologist. Started the Second World War. He volunteered to fight fascism. He was deeply anti-fascist. And having done a few months of training, was frustrated that he wasn't in the fight. So wrote a letter to General Smuts, criticizing him for his cowardice for not sending the troops to the front line. He was just like a really brave, principled man.
Yeah.
And a few months later, he was, in North Africa fighting the Germans.
Wow.
So.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And what's your biggest accomplishment?
So I suppose the easy one is Solomonic. We began it as an idea, and it's really hard to build a business from scratch. You don't have any customers. You don't know whether anyone's going to buy your product. You've got to really build it and test it and engage. So to go through that process, and now I sit and I look at, we have 10,000 users from the world's best law firms as customers, and seeing them use it every day. I get an alert every Friday telling me about our usage, and it's quite satisfying too.
It's a phenomenal story, actually, isn't it? Because to your point, you've built this from scratch. Having worked as I have in a multitude of law firms, it really is the go-to litigation analytics platform, and not really like anything else out there. Like there are softwares that do parts of what it does, but it's a fascinating.
Yeah,
tool,
and there is something, and I've spent most of my corporate career in sort of data and information. There is something about data which is empowering, and we talk about it as the new gold, the new oil. But if you build really good quality data, people find uses for it that you hadn't even imagined, and that's just a really compelling proposition.
Yeah, there's a famous quote, isn't there? In God we trust. Everyone else must bring data.
Yeah. We used to use it in our sales slides.
Yeah, it's look. I'm very big on data, as you know, also. So I totally get it. And the final, most important question: which song would you sing on a team karaoke night out?
Oh, jeez, this is embarrassing. It would probably be something about Barry Manilow, really embarrassingly bad. But I can't sing. My wife has regularly pointed this out to me. But I do enjoy karaoke, so yeah, something easy.
Amazing. And which job would you be doing if you wasn't doing this?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I probably have gone back into some sort of sales role.
Mm-hmm. But is this like truly your passion? Is data your passion?
I'm not a detail person at all. So some people expect, somebody who runs a data business to be sort of very sort of detail oriented and so on. I am innately deeply curious, and you can just learn so many interesting things through data. It's endlessly fascinating. I went to the RAF museum in Hendon, and they have a chart of sort of the use of different aeroplanes in the war, and I just found that chart really interesting. When you present information in interesting ways, you just learn so much.
Even on that, I mean, there's the Spitfire example, wasn't there? About they were looking at where the bullets were hitting the plane.
Yeah, like another example of like sort of the use of data, and And what's good about that story is it's also about interpreting it in the right way. Because a great story is like you don't bulletproof the place where the bullet holes are. You bulletproof the ones where they aren't, because those planes didn't get back. So yeah,
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's jump into Solomonic for listeners, viewers. Kind of what is Solomonic, and why litigation analytics? Why do they matter so much?
so the startups or new businesses generally come out of one or two things. Like either you see a problem that you're trying to solve, or you have a vision for something. And Solomonic's story begins with our two co-founders having this discussion about what Dr. Henry Stott, our one co-founder, was doing in the world of football. He was essentially doing the Moneyball story. If you know the book or the film for baseball, he was doing it for football in the UK. And this idea of, well, could you do some form of Moneyball for litigation? Essentially, Gideon's a barrister, and that was really the founding ideas, was this vision that sort of data would improve things, change things, enhance things, get you better results. And that's the founding kind of idea of Solomonic, is that with data you can make better decisions.
And is that it? My next question was, why litigation analytics matters before action even begins. Is that ultimately what the problem statement is generally here? Is it knowing before you start?
I think it matters all the way through, but I think there are fundamental decisions, and if you look at rational or semi-rational decision making in an organization, it when the stakes are high, it should always rely on data, and litigation has been an area where traditionally it hasn't. So that sort of speaks to both the opportunity, but also the ability for businesses to kind of sort of commercialize those decisions. Not data. Litigation as an asset. Just bring that mindset to it, and that goes very, very quickly. It speaks very, very quickly to the dispute as you get towards the point where you can't reconcile it through, early mediation or early negotiation.
And the fact that it's so sequential in its nature, generally, it should give that air of predictability, shouldn't it?
So it's an interesting space because on the one hand, the law is designed to be predictable. The whole notion of case law is like sort of you follow the law, so you would expect it to actually be predictive. And actually, in that sense, generally it is. When we look at how matters behave, the nature of the dispute does follow. But equally, every case has got unique components that you have to think through, and hence the necessity for experts, whether they are legal professionals or experts in sort of some area of evidence. So it's, on the one hand, it's quite, you will often told every case is unique, but is at one level. But another level, what the law is trying to do is to put it in a box. This is breach of contract, this is negligence, this is fraud. So it does actually lend itself to an element of predictability. But the data isn't just about prediction. It's about understanding the terrain and being able to make decisions based on that terrain, knowing what it looks like and how to make those decisions. Because a lot of the time, my experience as a corporate person was that we had any number of disputes when I was in my corporate career. Almost none of them were dealt with on the basis of the sort of the merit of the dispute. There were a bunch of factors that came to bear, many of which were either had a source of data or possibly you could drive data through those things. So it's got this kind of sort of almost halo effect of influence on what can happen in a dispute, and those things are all really important. They're not just about sort of predicting the outcome, but about understanding the consequence.
It's interesting because you touch on the point of the kind of terrain, and it just sets me off towards the importance of looking at, a data set as opposed to a data point. Because I think sometimes, in my experience of data, people kind of focus in, or and maybe biased to a certain extent, on the data points that tell the story that they think it should tell, and just the ability to look across the entirety of the data set to come to a comprehensive viewpoint, overview of what the information at hand is telling them. Which data points do you find are the most prevalent, the ones that people tend to be looking for the most when looking at litigation?
There are a few. I think the past behaviour, and again, a bit like the law, past behaviour is your best predictor of future behaviour. So, how has this organisation behaved in the past? Which law firm have they used? For what type of case? Have they tended to settle? Have they tended to go to trial? Have they tended to settle early? Have they tended to settle late? And so on. So that's probably one of the most frequently used ones. Case length. How long do these things take on average? What's the kind of the median time for a dispute like this? It's quite a popular one. Obviously, how a judge decides, and that one is helpful because it sets the terrain for prospects for success. If you go back to it, as a client, you ask 3 questions that sit fundamentally, at the back of your mind in any dispute. How strong is our case? How long is it going to take? And how much is it going to cost? And we have data that answers those certainly those first 2 questions, and certainly is a proxy for the third one. So those are some of the key ones. I think there are other data points that feed into not so much the specific litigation, but the function of a disputes team. So our data is used to demonstrate expertise. So the head of disputes at a major firm rang me up to tell me that he'd used the data showing how experienced they were in particular courts of particular matter types as part of a pitch to win a place on a panel. He'd won a place on the panel, and a small part of the data had helped with that. So there are ways in which the data gets used to sort of demonstrate things as well as to sort of support a piece of litigation.
And as we talk about predictability, I suppose one of the unpredictables in that process is people, is humans, right? And you guys also capture decisions by particular judges, tribunals, and
so we don't. We don't look for anything salacious. What we're interested in is the predictability of the court, and there's a particular reason for that, which is you can't choose your judge. So the court will assign you a judge based on the nature of your dispute, who's available, and so on. So when you come to a court, you come to the commercial court, you're going to get, one of a dozen or so highly credible expert judges. And what we look at is what the range of decision making across those judges can be. And what you find in general is it's quite narrow, that judges are very good at being consistent, which is one of the reasons why England and the English High Court is such an attractive destination. You aren't going to get renegade judges who rule in very different ways, which goes back again to the system itself, which fundamentally driven around those things. Now you do find within that you will find judges have particular attitudes to expert evidence, for example, or they might be more inclined to reference commercial sense in support of their findings. But even within that, you're not looking at anything that you'd put into a statistical sort of outlier category.
And interestingly, we were talking about this off camera, wasn't we? But in terms of kind of the probability of outcomes, it's fascinating, and you alluded to this earlier, how this has kind of gone away from a law firm is procured by a client to manage a litigation for them. They then look at Solomonic to get an understanding of the terrain. into a kind of a commercial opportunity as well, right? Where law firms are using Solomonic for predictability, to answer pitches, to get a better understanding of what the commercial drivers will be, the price points within that.
I mean, one of my favorite stories is we had a a, a, a customer who used the data about a particular bank's use of their panel firms for certain types of litigation, and they looked at that behavior and they went to the bank and they said, "You keep using firm X for, I think it was fraud. We have a really strong fraud team, and we've got this experience. And why haven't you considered us? We're also on the panel," and so on. And off the back of that conversation, so both the data that told them something that they weren't aware of, but also the data to demonstrate their expertise, the next piece of fraud work that came along landed in their hands. So it can be used very powerfully to sort of as a commercial tool. Of course, if you go back at strategic level, and I mean, there isn't a single leading disputes practice in London today that isn't trying to think very strategically. Whether it's the rise of AI or the challenge of litigation funding or any of these other things that are kind of impacting the sector, you have to think strategically. And they're starting to look at where is litigation happening, where are the sweet spots, and it's remarkably consistent. So they can look at a space and go, right, we see the organizations that are having this sort of issue. We can project that onto other organizations likely to face the same risks, regulatory threats, fraud, negligence concerns, and so on. And we can start to proactively target them based on that data.
And you touched on a point there in terms of presenting it to a client. Is it still just law firms that are procuring Solomonic for that predictability, or are clients starting to think about that themselves?
Good question. So they are beginning to, and I think that's partly come out of simply just never being aware that it was possible to have that data. And Alex Oddy described in a webinar we ran recently, where he talked about the role of the lawyer to translate legal risk into business risk. And what data does is it helps you with that translation, because business people like numbers. They like to be able to look at a problem and go, okay, well, this is the level of risk. We have an X% chance of this happening, a Y% chance of that happening. And we can now start to make a decision on that, as opposed to trying to get your head around, repudiatory breach or legal concepts that they don't have time, and they don't have the training to deal with. So what's happening is corporate in-house teams are beginning to go, first of all, this data exists. I can use this to begin to frame that, begin to manage the expectations of my stakeholder, but also, particularly importantly, they can use it to start to sort of move from being very responsive to being very proactive. And I'll give you two examples. One example is corporates are very, in-house legal teams are quite often the last to know about a dispute. Mm-hmm. I worked in corporate for many years. I don't think it's a secret that in any corporate, you try and avoid the legal department as much as you can, because they're going to put obstacles in your way. You can't do this, or regulation prohibits that. And commercial people are just trying to run a business. So often a dispute will begin somewhere in an organization. You think about it, a typical FTSE 100 company, they have lots of divisions, lots of offices, and so on. A dispute will happen somewhere. It'll take time before it gets to legal, because you try to resolve that dispute yourselves. You only wait until it gets to the point where you can no longer manage it, or it's gone up the food chain and someone's gone, you have to speak to legal about it. Now, what that means is legal are often the last to know. What the data does is help you identify that earlier, because we can spot a claim being issued on the court file, perhaps a week before the legal team even find out about it. So that's one example where the team can do that. The other example is, if you're a good in-house team, you're looking at risks all the time, not just current litigation, but risks. And you can use the data to go, well, what are my peers being What kind of litigation are they, facing at the
Hmm.
moment? Are there things they're being sued for that we need to be aware of, that we need to be more careful about? Everyone should be studying their peers and their competitors and similar organizations in the market or organizations with similar profiles, because it's going to help prepare you for what might come down the track.
It's a fascinating thought because and my mind goes to the commercial aspects as well, given my background, and it's just that with the kind of the evolving and exponential kind of evolution of generative AI and talking about law firms and how knowledge is becoming commoditized. I think we go back to the point of predictability. It kind of all takes you back to a point where, with all of this data available, with kind of what generative AI can do, we're moving to a world where clients will expect fixed cost for everything. And the notion that we have a dispute that looks like this, how much will it cost? Not sure. Here's my rate card. It just feels for the first time, truly for the first time ever, that the rate card as a concept is close to extinction. Would you agree?
I mean, uh, the, the rumors of its demise are perhaps too
Oh God,
strong, right?
100 years
But
old at
but
least. The
and
rumors
and
of
and law and law firms are extraordinary businesses. If you look at the FTSE 100, you go back 30 years. Almost none of the companies in the FTSE 100 are, are here today who were there 30 years ago. If you went back 30 years and looked at the top 30 law firms, they're still the
they're
top
still
30 law
there.
firms.
Yeah.
Law firms are very good, and lawyers are very good at retaining, meaning and value and purpose through that. Having said that, I think, you see now in the discussion, whether it's on LinkedIn or at a conference or a webinar or anything, people talk more and more about the sort of the disparity between it. If a FTSE 100 company with lots of different products and lots of complexity can forecast their revenues and so on, surely for a case you can predict or you can forecast it. It might be a little bit off, but you shouldn't be massively off. And if you can forecast something, then you can price it to that forecast with some wiggle room. But you
Yeah.
should surely be able to do that.
I mean, you have your assumptions, right? I suppose it's just me thinking about from a contentious law perspective in particular. You're sitting on this treasure trove of data, and given that data is now readily accessible, what is the excuse for a law firm to not be able to give cost certainty based on a certain set of parameters around the cost of a dispute?
Yeah, and I think what you might also see uh, is the growing skill, partly with the addition of data, partly with the addition of AI, of the in-house head of litigation or risk in their ability to themselves forecast those things,
Mm.
to extract, Solomonic, we were talking before about doing something on costs in 2026, to take data from Solomonic, to take data from their own litigation track records, to demand sort of historic pricing from their law firms, for instance, and then to build something out and then actually use that with the law firm. Say, okay, here's what we think it's going to cost. You tell us where we've got it wrong. So I think as business managers, and all I see in in-house lawyers is them becoming better and better at being business managers. They start to impose, budgets and forecasts,
Yeah.
and the law firms will have to respond to that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think it's the broader point around kind of the disruption of AI, and mentioned earlier about the whole notion of knowledge becoming more
Mm.
commoditized. But ultimately, those hourly based increments of how you charge for that knowledge become ever difficult. And it's just thinking about, and a lot of law firms in particular are grappling with this at the moment in terms of kind of redefining, reinventing their commercial legal strategies, given the kind of the introduction of legal generative AI and its ability, and kind of taking all the facets available to them. And Alex Smith, one of the guys who was on here, always talks about IA before AI in terms of the information architecture, and it just takes me to that point of having access to this quality treasure trove of data, plus having, you know, legal AI and its ability to do what it can do, it takes you to a place where I just can't see a world where clients will not expect a level of cost certainty, to your point, where in every other aspect of life, pretty much, you know, you say, well, how much is this going to cost? And there's a price attached to it. How far away from are we from, you know, a fixed price of, well, based on everything you've told us, we think this litigation will have 3 experts and 5 witnesses, and you've said, you know, you think there's 1 million documents in disclosure and so forth, it's going to cost X, as opposed to, you know, 1 or 2 standard deviations saying it could cost 10 million, but then it could cost 20 million. It's like, well, that's a big difference in budget to go to, you know, my CFO and get sign off for this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one factor in that, I think, is that where Solomonic data is really helpful is understanding how your opponent might behave and the law firm they might choose. You know, there are law firms in our data. If you chose them, you would anticipate, you know, more interlocutory proceedings. They will throw any number of, you know, barriers in the way to the advancement of that litigation, for example. And that would be smart strategy on their part. It wouldn't be, you know, vexatious. So it can help you with understanding that. But I think, to the point, I think it's you know, organizations. You think about legal as a cost, and they think about the legal aspects that are repetitive, and they go, well, like, this is where we begin with that process of standardization or fixed cost or cost certainty. And then you come to litigation, which is, by definition, you know, comes at you slightly, you can be potentially blindsided. Again, if you're looking at the wider universe of the market, you can identify those things before they land on your desk. But litigation generally to an organization is going to be a, you know, somewhat to highly volatile surprise, and then you've got to deal with that. So I think once you've got a culture where your expectation is of budget certainty or cost certainty or prediction, it will start to invade the disputes spend. I think today it remains largely something, unless you're an organization which has a large and consistent burden of litigation. It's going to be a bad surprise. But I think because you've created that idea of, you know, certainty can be, you know, be found in the area of legal cost, then surely we can start to extend it.
So, kind of final section from me was focus around the future. How far away do you think we are from a place where data becomes the default lens for litigation strategy, as in those lawyers that are not leaning on, you know, the litigation data analytics available to them are, you know, starting the race, you know, 50 meters behind those that are?
So actually, we had the managing partner of an extremely well-known law firm actually look at Solomonic and go, without Solomonic, we're at a competitive disadvantage. So I think that day's already arrived. I mean, we have, as I said, 10,000 users who are already starting to do those things. How far we are from a world where you would do strategy without it? I think every market has, you know, its early adopters, its innovators, its laggards.
The law of diffusion of innovation.
You know, I think we're getting close to sort of where the top of the bell curve, to use a chart. I think that we're beginning to go, like, we should do this. We must always, you know, draw on this before we make a decision.
But is there also an additional lens to that, where every decision made by a law firm needs to be backed up by data, in the sense that, you know, we're taking this strategic approach. The reason we're taking this is because of X, and to a certain extent, the way, you know, precedence has worked for hundreds of years. But it's like, you know, on the basis of the data we've seen of previous cases, similar cases, this has been the successful approach. I mean, is that becoming more prominent, in the sense that, you know, is Solomonic a one-stop shop at the start to shape the strategy and then off I go to deliver the strategy of the case? Or are you seeing a world where litigation or arbitration, whatever it is, disputes teams are setting up at the outset based on the analytics and then making conscious decisions and backing up those decisions by revisiting Solomonic throughout the duration of
Yeah,
matters?
I mean, so we see that in the way the product is used. So we see, usage early on in a dispute. We see usage running right the way through to, when you get close to your trial and you know who your judge is, it's very helpful to understand how that judge has, for example, treated expert evidence in the past, and that can inform, how you support your expert witnesses. It can inform the way you think about your arguments. Things that are really important to you in terms of how you approach the trial itself. So we see that use becoming, prevalent throughout the course. We've got data on how long it takes judges to, produce the judgment at the end of the trial. Now, you might have gone into that trial very confident of success. The trial might have not gone quite your way, and you might use the gap between the end of the hearing or the trial itself and the judge issuing their decision to actually pursue settlement. So that understanding how long that judge is likely to take is quite helpful in pressuring the other side, for example.
So going to the people lens on this, is the data literate lawyer now essential?
I think, so I've had so many conversations in the last 5 or 6 years with lawyers who've said, I'm not good at numbers, I'm not good at the maths. And I think, my message has always been, it's not that complex. You don't need to understand, algorithmic prediction. You need to be pretty numerate. I think the skills are in the ability to understand what data is telling you. So, for example, if you have a case which has got you think it's got a 50-50 chance of success, Solomonic's forecasting model might give it a score of 50-50. And then you evaluate and you come to the view that it's got a 60% chance. That's not a 10% increase in of chance of success. It's a 20% increase. And that's quite a big jump. Now, if you can go to somebody and say, like sort of the way we've assessed this, we now put a 20% higher likelihood of success. That's a meaningful difference. So understanding the maths of that is quite important. Another one might be if you've got a 50% chance of going to trial, effectively there's you've got a 1-to-1 chance. And half the time it won't. That's a 1-to-1 sort of odds, essentially. If you then move that case and you reevaluate it and you say, well, actually, it's got a 66.6% chance of going to trial, it's not a 16% increase. It is, in fact, a doubling because you've now gone from a 1-to-1 to a 2-to-1.
Yeah.
So understanding what the percentages do to the odds is really important because now you're suddenly talking about a very different possible outcome, and being able to again go back to that translation role. It's like translating that different to your client based on might be that disclosure has thrown up some interesting things, and so you've reevaluated what you think the likelihood of trial is going to be.
It's such a fascinating space, isn't it? So the final question I had for you was, if you could redesign one aspect of disputes, let's say of litigation, to unlock even greater value from analytics, what would it be?
So I think fundamentally it would be to get the court service and the court system to understand that there is value in data, and that would then mean that they would record things and not delete them, for instance, that the information would be published in a more consistent way, that it would be more easily available. Because if we do those things, it suddenly makes it much, much easier to generate data, to generate insight, to inform decision making. If you compare, London is an extraordinary place to litigate. It's got very high quality solicitors and barristers. It's got very, consistently applied law, and the data shows that. It's got very high quality judges. It's got a very largely transparent process as well. So you can see how it works. You know you can do it. Obviously, you can enforce effectively from London. But the one thing it struggles with is the quality of the data. And we compare that to, the federal courts in the US, where much more data is available. And that data creates transparency, creates a sense of confidence, and you know what's going to happen.
Amazing. Well, Edward, thanks for talking to me.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be on.
Thank you. Thank you for watching the LOPSided Podcast with me, John O'Donoghue. Don't forget to follow us on TikTok, Instagram and LinkedIn at the LOPSided Podcast. Check out our website at www.thelopsidedpodcast.com, and most importantly, like us and subscribe to us here on YouTube.